Hello everyone, this is Ulf, and I want to talk to you guys about what cards I think have the most potential in Historic from the Brothers' War and the retro artifacts as well, of course. So, let's just get right into it. First off is Altar of Dementia. I think this is, I'm pretty sure this is the first 2 mana free sack outlet that we have in Historic. So, I mean, that by itself is just enough to make this card see play, in my opinion. I mean, free sack outlets are just so important for, sacrifice strategies, obviously. And this is a really good one. I mean, you can use this to mill yourself. Maybe you have, you're playing a card like, man, I forgot the name, but the 3 mana white enchantment that reanimates a 1 drop every turn. Um, you know, you can use that. Maybe, you're gonna mill like a Woe Strider or something sometimes, or you can just use it as a win condition to mill your opponent out of the game. And obviously, there are some combos you can do, and this is the combo that I think this is the combo that has the most potential out of all the new combos. And believe me, there are a lot of new combos. So basically, you have Putrid Goblin. Any of these cards make it enter the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter. Whenever you sacrifice it, it gets a -1/-1 counter. The counters kind of, negate themselves. So you can just sacrifice this as many times as you want to mill your opponent out of the game. And as you can see, there's just a lot of redundancy with this combo. And you can even do it at instant speed with a card like First Day of Class. So I think that's really powerful, but I don't think you need the combo. You know, I think this card is good enough just as a 2 mana free sack outlet that doesn't die to a fatal push or something. Next up is Ashnod's Altar. This is another free sack outlet. Of course, this one is a bit more expensive, but it also has a really big upside. I mean, um, just adding any mana from sacrificing a creature is just, I mean, the most we see nowadays is sacrifice a creature, scry one or something. Making mana from sacrificing creatures is incredibly powerful, and so I think this card is good enough. Just for example, you can play this in your sacrifice deck and play like a Karn or something, and you sacrifice a card like Hunted Witness or Doom Traveler, a card that when it dies makes a token. You instantly make 4 colorless mana. You can cast a Karn, then Karn can get another big dumb colorless creature or something, which you can cast. I mean, it's just really powerful effect. But of course, there are also combos you can do with this card. This is a really iconic combo card in Commander mainly. I don't even think this card is legal in Modern, actually. But yeah, basically, there are 2 different combos. There's the animation module combo and the Slimefoot combo. The animation module works with, of course, these 2 and any of these, creatures that gain a counter when something dies in case of these 2, or when an artifact enters the battlefield, of course, because this card makes artifacts. Artifact tokens, I mean. So yeah. I don't think the Ocean Dissident is what you're looking for, mainly because if you look here, both of these cards, both of these cards are colorless, and these only need black mana, which you're probably playing anyway in a sacrifice deck. So, and you're gonna run a card like Squirrel in your sacrifice deck anyway, so I think you could just kind of try to play this combo in a fair sacrifice shell. And it seems, I mean, of course there are a lot of pieces, because this combo, it gives you infinite death triggers, which with these two would mean an infinitely large creature, and you also make infinite colorless mana. Of course, colorless mana isn't something you can really use that well, but if you're playing a card like Karn, you can obviously do something with it. If you're running a card like Hangerback Walker, it's also really good. You would just make infinite tokens if you have a Hangerback Walker. And there's also another card which we're going to be talking about in the future, which goes really well with this one. It's the Transmogrant's Crown. But there's also the Chatterfang and Slimefoot combo. Actually, the combo is Ashnod's Altar, Slimefoot, anything that doubles the amounts of tokens you make, because we want Slimefoot, the Slimefoot ability to make 2 tokens, which you can then sacrifice to the altar, which gives you 2 more tokens, and the Slimefoot comes with his own win condition, which is nice. It drains your opponent out of the game. So I think you could also look into this. You can find these cards with Galactic Company maybe. There's also another card we're going to be talking about in the future, which is Kayla's Reconstruction, which also seems really good because it can find any of these pieces. And, it finds any of these pieces also. So, yeah, I don't know how good this combo is going to be. I think it's going to be worse than the Altar of Dementia combo, but I think it also has some amount of potential, especially because these 2 creatures are just like kind of good by themselves, and you can play up to 8 of them, so there's a good amount of redundancy. And if you're playing a card like Karn, it finds the rest of the pieces for you, which is nice. There's also even an equipment, I think it's called Ghost Talisman or something. It's a black equipment which you equip to a creature, and it basically gives it the scroll text. Whenever something dies, it gets a +1/+1 counter. So Karn can actually find any piece of the combo, which is very, very powerful. Next up is Chromatic Star. I think this card is, pretty simple, but definitely very powerful. Anything that wants to sacrifice artifacts, this is probably something you should be looking at. You can loop this with a card like Emery for just some value. You can also sacrifice to Onicode on Anvil or Treasure Treasure. You can also use Goblin Engineers, kind of like an Emery kind of thing, which you can just loop for value. With another artifact, of course. The engineer needs 2 of them, but yeah, basically if your deck cares about sacrificing artifacts, this is probably something you should look into. Next up is Defense Grid and Calamity's Wake. I'm gonna talk about both of these cards at once because I think they kind of do the same thing. You basically want these cards if you're protecting your combo deck. I think any kind of combo deck should probably look into having one of these in the sideboard. Probably Defense Grid. Defense Grid is definitely better because you can play it before the turn you go off, basically to make your combo turn a lot cheaper. You can't do that with Calamity's Wake. You have to play it on the turn you combo off. But maybe your combo deck cares about instants or sorceries or something like that. Calamity's Wake definitely something to look into. Next up is Goblin Charbelcher. Honestly, I don't have much faith in this card, but it's something. you have Ironcrag Feet, which gives you the perfect amount of mana that you need to play the Charbelcher and activate it. This is actually quite a hard combo to interact with. You know, you would need something very specific like, you know, like a Leyline of Sanctity, for example, to give yourself hexproof or something of that kind of sort, or, you know, just counter spells work too, I guess. But, you know, artifact removal doesn't do anything to this card, and, you know, even if your opponent is, you know, almost dead, this card can still, you know, kill you. So I think it could have some potential. I don't really have much faith for it, but definitely something to look out for. I'll probably try to make a list with this or two. You know, it helps that we have a card like Strike It Rich to also accelerate you into the combo. But I'm not sure if we really have like the critical mass of mana acceleration that you would need for something like Charbelcher, or even just like for the consistency, you know, to find both of these cards very consistently. But, you know, it's something to keep in mind, of course. Next up is Liquimetal Coating. I think this is a card that, you know, if you're playing Karn, you should definitely have this in your sideboard. I mean, it's just a really good card. It turns Karn into this huge threat, because if your opponent can't kill it, they will lose the game. You know, Karn can basically destroy a land every turn if you have both of these, and, you know, every turn your opponent has less resources to work with, and it just makes life very difficult for them. You can also combo it with cards like a Braid if you want. You know, basically just lets you destroy anything with a card like a Braid, or like Kolaghan's Command or Prismaric Command. Anything that destroys an artifact, you can turn any permanent into an artifact and then destroy it. Of course, this, you know, this kind of interaction hasn't been exactly the most successful ever, but, you know, it's something to keep in mind. Many of these cards are cards that you could be playing in your main deck anyways. So, you know, it's definitely something to keep in mind. I don't think you should be building your deck around this interaction, but, you know, if you already have some of these in your main deck, maybe, you know, maybe Karn or Coating kind of go up in value a little bit. This is Springleaf Drum, obviously a clear upgrade for the affinity decks, especially blue-white affinity. I think that deck really struggled with mana costs. It was just, you know, the mana base was just kind of a nightmare, because you want to play cards like Treasure Vault and Darksteel Citadel, you know, the artifact lands, because they come in untapped. But then you know your mana is way worse, but I think this is gonna help a lot. We already had a card that was kind of like this, but it only made colorless mana, which is a pretty big difference, especially now that the affinity decks are playing Retrofitter Foundry. You know, they can make a lot of tokens, artifact creature tokens, that you can tap for this. So it's not like they're gonna, you know, have like a shortage of creatures that you want to tap for this. I also think that with Springleaf Drum, it's a good idea to revisit both of these spells. I think they weren't playable before because they were just too hard to cast. Double blue was just too hard on the mana base. But now, you know, this is virtually 4 more blue sources in your deck. So, you know, maybe it's worth trying out these cards again. I do think they are good enough to warrant some testing at least. Next up is Lodestone Golem. This is another card that I think could have a spot in the affinity decks. You know, it seems kind of, you know, because I think a lot of people are gonna look at this card and they think of Thalia, you know, and they're just like, oh, but this costs 4 mana. But like, this is really, it's a really powerful effect because this not only affects non-creature spells, you know, like instants and sorceries and planeswalkers, but it also affects non-artifact creatures. And making your opponent's creatures cost more mana is a really, really rare effect, you know, and it's incredibly powerful. It sounds like a, you know, doesn't sound like a lot, but making your opponent's 3-drops cost 4 mana is just, it's just huge. It's absolutely massive. And the affinity decks, they're already playing stuff like Esper Sentinel, and I mean, if you get both of these on the field, it's just like you're just gonna be drawing cards left and right. Your opponent's gonna be in a fucking nightmare. But and you know, the affinity decks already have mana acceleration with Springleaf Drum. So playing this card on turn 3, I mean, that sounds really good to me. So that's probably something you want to look into if you're playing affinity. But you know, it could be that Karn, Sign of Urza, is still the better 4 mana card to play. But you know, worth looking into it for sure. Mesmeric Orb, this is another card that seems kind of simple, but I think it's secretly very powerful. The problem is that I don't think it really has a home in Historic right now, but you know, in the future, if you're gonna make a deck that cares about either milling your opponent or milling yourself, I think Mesmeric Orb is a really, really, really good card. I mean, for just 2 mana, this can put a lot of cards in your graveyard or your opponent's graveyard. Of course, it's better if you want to mill yourself, you know, because you have some control over it. You can just tap your lands and you're guaranteed to mill some stuff every turn. But of course, this is also good if you want to mill your opponent out, because your opponent is going to have to use their lands, so this is a card that is going to mill them too. You know, so maybe you have like maybe we get like kind of a dredge strategy in the future, or maybe mill, you know, straight up mill wants to play this. I could see that happening. Maybe not too relevant now, but it could be in the future. Phyrexian Revoker, this is another card that saw a decent amount of play in Modern. It's basically just Pithing Needle with a tiny difference here. You can use this on, obviously you cannot use it on lands, but you can use it on mana dorks. So Pithing Needle, it will never stop mana abilities. Revoker, you can't use it on, you can use it on mana abilities if it's from like a creature, a mana dork. You just cannot name lands with this. But yeah, I mean, basically we're gonna talk about a lot of combos in this video, and Phyrexian Revoker basically stops all of them, you know, to some extent or another. Phyrexian Revoker just stops all of them. And you know, if you are playing a creature heavy deck and you want to have a little bit of disruption, this is a great card for your sideboard. I don't even think you need to care much about the tribe, you know, like I think you can play this easily in humans. In fact, I'm pretty sure people did that in Modern. So yeah, I mean, if you're playing a creature heavy deck that, you know, doesn't want to lose tempo by playing a card like Pithing Needle, Phyrexian Revoker is definitely a thing you should be looking into. Next up is Semblance Anvil. This is another card that I think is gonna, you know, kind of be kind of ignored by people, but I think this is a really powerful effect. I mean, this could basically discount your whole deck by 2, which is huge. I don't think you're gonna be using this just for value, but it does have some combo potential with a Acererak and Gwenna. You know, you make a Acererak cost just 1 mana if you have this, and then Gwenna taps for 2 mana, And as the wreck bounces, you can just do it over and over again, and you can basically venture into a dungeon infinite times. You get, you know, anything the dungeon provides, you get a arbitrarily large amount of it. So treasures, you know, you can drain your opponent, you can, you know, basically, you get basically infinite everything. Of course, that is if the MTG Arena client lets you do that, but, you know, technically it does work. And Trap Finder isn't really part of the combo, but I mean, I just had to put this card here because it goes so well with Gwenna. Also a new card, by the way, because this gives it a 2 cost discount, but it also gives it haste, which is just massive. Which this lets this card, you know, you play it for 1 mana, you can instantly tap for 2 mana and play your combo and go off. I mean, it just seems pretty good to me. Of course, you know, the best thing you could name with Anvil is probably artifacts, because, you know, you can play Anvil for 3, exile an artifact, then play a second Anvil for just 1 mana, and now every artifact in your deck costs 4 less to cast, which is just crazy. You know, you can play a Mystic Forge for free and then just go off and kill your opponent with like an Aether Flux Reservoir or something of the sort. I'm not sure how good either of these combos are gonna be, but I'm definitely gonna try them out. I mean, it sounds fun at least. Well, this one sounds fun. I don't know how fun it is to, you know, try to win the game by draining your opponent for 1 every 10 clicks or something on Arena, but, you know, something to think about. Next up is Sword of the Meek. This is another card that has a combo. Basically, you can sacrifice Sword of the Meek to a card like Ravenous Intruder. When you sacrifice Sword of the Meek, it makes a 1/1 token, which brings back Sword of the Meek, and you can rinse and repeat to make infinite tokens and make an infinitely large Ravenous Intruder. By the way, there's another card that does the same thing that Intruder does. I think it's called Rust Monster. It's basically the same card, except it has First Strike and it costs 3 mana instead of 2. So the combo does have a good amount of redundancy, which is nice. But I think the best part about Sword of the Meek is with Onycot Anvil. You can sacrifice every turn. Anvil makes a 1/1, brings it back. You know, this is just a really nice engine. This just looks pretty good to me. And with a card like Goblin Engineer, you don't even need to play many copies of Sword of the Meek. You know, you can just play 1 or 2, and the engineer will find it for you. So I think this is something to look into for sure. I think this is a must if you're playing Onycot Anvil. Just, you know, having this kind of engine is everything the Anvil deck wants. You know, I don't know how good the combo is gonna be, but definitely something to think about. It's nice that Requisitioner has Improvise, so, you know, if you have enough artifacts, which you should have, you could just play this for 1 mana. And of course, Sword of the Meek, you can, you know, you can just basically have it in a graveyard, so you don't really need to pay mana for it. And then, you know, a card like Ravenous Intruder is also really cheap, so the combo can be very cheap, very efficient. But, you know, it sounds kind of clunky. I don't know how good it's gonna be. Next up is Wurmcoil Engine. I think this is easily the best 6 mana creature in the format, and I like it the most because of Castle Garenbrig. I mean, this card I think is good at 6. It will stabilize your board, you know, unless of course you're going up against you know, something like Wizards that just, you know, flies over it and just kills you for 1 billion damage in 1 turn. But otherwise, this card will stabilize you. It's good against removal because of the tokens it makes when it dies. With the Castle Garenbrig, it basically only costs 5 mana. You can get it with Karn. I mean, I think if you're looking for a ramp strategy, this is definitely a card you should look into. Obviously, you're probably going to be playing Karn anyways. Wurmcoil Engine, I think it's a great card. I already have a list for a new ramp deck which uses Karn and all of the new good Karn targets in the sideboard, and it looks very strong to me. I'll definitely be posting a video about it once we get the cards and I get to play test it a bit. You know, maybe it's just shit, and then in that case I wouldn't want to waste you guys' times, but it looks very strong to me. This is Loran. This is, you know, like other people have said, this is the first Reclamation Sage in white. You know, white obviously has other ways to kill artifacts, but never like this. You know, in an ETB, in a creature that stays, you don't have to sacrifice it or anything. So, and it is a human, so I think this is a card that already has a slot on the format. You know, you can play this in humans, in mono white or green white humans, and you know, this line of texture, you know, it's not going to be always great. I don't think it's bad. I think a lot of people think this, you know, like, oh, this, you know, this line of text just doesn't exist. But, you know, the only thing you need to think about is, can you use this card better than your opponent, you know? And if you think that is true, then you should be using this. I mean, it is a pretty powerful effect. And the reason why I'm most excited about this card, I'm a huge fan of Death and Taxes. I've tried to make it work for a billion times in Historic. It never quite works. But Spirit of the Labyrinth is a card that is legal in Pioneer. So we should be getting it sooner or later, hopefully. And I mean, if you have both of these together, then you're just going sicko mode, basically. You're drawing an extra card every turn, your opponent can draw extra cards, and it's just gonna be great. So I'm really looking forward to having Spirit of the Labyrinth. Even if we don't get that card, I think Loran is pretty good by itself. If you're playing you know, mono white, or if you care about the human type, of course. This is Laydown Arms. Of course, I was talking about Death in Texas. This is a card I think Death in Texas would love. But I think it's also good in control decks as well. You know, you don't, you know, I think a lot of people are gonna think like, oh, you need like 20 planes to make this card work, but I don't really think that's true. If this card is just like, you know, like a better portable hole, then I think that's good enough. You know, I think blue-white control could use this. You know, you can use all the Triomes. They can play cards like Fabled Passage, maybe. I even think this has some potential in aggro decks as well. Of course, giving your opponent life isn't great, but having this kind of 1 mana removal that trades up in in mana cost is just really powerful. And I mean, it's not like, you know, it's not like 3 health is gonna save you against humans, you know. They're gonna have a massive fucking Adeline hitting you for 8 or something, and you're gonna die anyways. I doubt the three life is gonna make that big of a difference if you're, you know, staring a big board of beefy humans. So, you know, if you're in white and you have a decent amount of planes in your deck, you could definitely play this card. You know, talking about humans and white cards, Recruitment Officer I think is another card that just has a ready built home in Historic. I think this is a great card to get with Ranger Captain. I think if you're playing Ranger Captain, you just kind of have to make a slot for this in your deck, at least as a one of. I mean, I even want to play more of these, you know. I was talking about Death and Taxes, I'm not gonna stop talking about it. It's like my favorite archetype. This card would be amazing in Death and Taxes. Please, WotC, just give me Spirit of the Labyrinth and Stoneforge Mystic, please. Thank you. This is Arcane Proxy. Ugh, Arcane Proxy. Sorry. I'm not really sure how good this card is. I just wanted to put something from blue because, you know, otherwise I would just have no blue cards. But, I mean, technically this card is pretty good, right? I mean, you're casting a 2-mana spell, hopefully, a 2-mana spell, and then you have, you know, you're basically paying for 1 blue mana for an artifact wizard, which, you know, could be good. I don't think Wizards wants this. Wizards wants to be a lot more aggressive, but, you know, maybe you're playing a deck like Mill that has Glimpse the Unthinkable and, you know, cards like Founding the Third Path, you know, which already incentivize you to play a lot of powerful 2-mana instants and sorcery. So I think this is something you could look into. Definitely on paper it's probably good enough, but, you know, we have to see if it'll find a home. Diabolic Intent is another card you probably heard of. I think a lot of people are kind of overreacting. This card is definitely good, but it's also very narrow. You know, you need to be playing a lot of creatures, you need to have cards that you actively want to sacrifice. But if you can meet those restrictions, I think this is really good, you know. But also something you have to think about, you know, like, do you need a tutor? You know, you could just be playing a card like, you know, like Village Rites, which is more efficient, you know. But if you're playing a sacrifice-based combo deck, which, you know, I've talked about I've talked about a bunch of those already. The Anvil one, the Ashnod's Altar one, and the Goblin one. I think all of these decks could play this card maybe. So definitely try it out. I think this is one of those cards that you really have to play with to know how good it is. I think I can definitely see how it could be kind of awkward if your deck isn't, you know, really running a critical mass of cards that you actively want to sacrifice. But if you do meet those restrictions, obviously this is a really powerful effect. Hostile Negotiations. Honestly, I was kind of high on this card when I first saw it, but the more I think about it, the more it kind of just seems kind of like, you know, it's just kind of awkward. In Historic, you just spending 4 mana to not impact the board, and on the opposite side, you're actually losing life. But I do think there's one way you can make this card into, you know, probably the best draw spell in the format, and that is with cards like Burial Rites, cards that have flashback. Because, you know, because the cards from go to the graveyard, a card like Burial Rites goes up in value massively. You know, I could even see this spawn a new Reanimator deck. You know, Reanimator isn't really a thing in Historic, but when you have a card that is, you know, it looks at 6 cards deep, and, you know, you can find Burial Rites and a creature you want to reanimate, and, you know, you do this on the end of your opponent's turn. On your turn, you can just go off and reanimate and do your thing. I mean, it's just very powerful. Of course, your opponent's gonna be playing Graveyard Hate, but I mean, this is just, it just looks at so many cards, you know. Even if your opponent has Graveyard Hate, if you can, you know, for example, you can destroy their Graveyard Hate, instantly cast this card, find an Burial Rites, a creature that you want to sacrifice, and just instantly go off in your turn out of nowhere, you know. So definitely very powerful card. if you're using the graveyard. Another card I should probably have put here is Faithful Mending. You know, it's just kind of like a faithless looting, but in blue-white. That's another card that looks really, really good with hostile negotiations. So, you know, if you're a fan of Reanimator, I think this is a huge boost to that kind of strategy. This is Transmogrant's Crown. I was talking about it earlier for the Ashnod's Altar deck. I think this card has a lot of potential. I've seen a lot of people be kind of low on this card, but it just seems kind of good to me. Like, of course, if you have Ashnod's Altar and the Crown, you basically, you know, you can basically just sacrifice creatures to draw cards. You know, if you have a card like Nested Shambler, this is another pretty incredible interaction, because Nested Shambler makes tokens based on its power. This gives it 3 power, which means that when it dies, it makes 3 tokens. So if you have Crown, Altar, and the Shambler, you're basically spending 1 black mana to draw 4 cards, which is, it's insane, you know. But even just, you know, even without the Altar, like, if you just have a card like this on defense, like, how do they do anything? You know, how do they attack? Are they gonna fatal push your creature and, you know, basically 2-for-1 themselves? Or, you know, are they gonna, you know, just attack into it and then you trade and draw a card, which is also really bad for them? I mean, this just seems kind of a nightmare to deal with, to be honest. Of course, the power boost is also gonna help you pressure your opponents' planeswalkers, for example, or their life total. This is not really a card they want to block either. So, I mean, it just seems pretty good. 2 mana up front and 1 black mana to equip it. I mean, it's just pretty good in my opinion. You know, could be that it's kind of slow, but, you know, having colorless, you know, having cards that use the colorless mana from Ashnod's Altar very well, and this card uses it very well. It just seems really good to me. It just seems very, very good. If you're playing a sacrifice deck, I think you should probably look into Transmogrant's Crown. Of course, it's, you know, the only awkward part about this card is that it's not a creature and it's not a sack outlet, you know. The sacrifice decks, they're usually a mix of creatures, you know, cards that you want to sacrifice, and cards that sacrifice creatures. This kind of doesn't do any of those two, and you really need a critical mass of both. So, you know, just don't go crazy. Don't play 4 of these. Play just a couple, or get it off your Karn, you know. But if you can do that, if you build your deck correctly, I think this can be very, very powerful. And it's also pretty hard to, you know, it's an artifact. It's not a creature that, you know, it's not like a Midnight Reaper that your opponent can just shock and get rid of and never have to deal with it again. If you play this card on game 1 against like a, you know, a deck like Rakdos, for example, and they don't have main deck artifact removal, I mean, I just don't see how they win, you know. They can't attack you. If you want to attack them, they can't really block, and if they don't want to give you cards, I mean, it just seems in any kind of slow-ish matchup, I think this card is gonna really, really shine. And, you know, talking about artifacts, Brotherhoods, and I think this is easily gonna be the most played card from the set in Historic. It's just so flexible. I mean, there's not really much to be said about this card that hasn't been said already. You can play this card in a main deck and it's just gonna randomly win you games against all the artifact decks in the format. You know, even if you're playing against something like Humans, having a card like this on your main deck is gonna be really good. You know, if you're playing a deck like Jund and you have, you know, cards like Tarmogoyf. Your opponent has a bunch of creatures. You use this. You clear their board. Your Tarmogoyf still lives. I mean, this card is just so flexible. It's so flexible. It's honestly kind of insane. Like, I don't think that effects this powerful should be this flexible, you know? Like, a card like Kolaghan's Command was really good because you could play it in your main deck and you could just randomly hose some artifacts, and this card does the same except to a much bigger degree. I mean, it's kind of like Divine Purge. I mean, obviously Divine Purge hits all the indestructible artifact lands and stuff like that, but man, this card is a blowout against artifact decks, against any deck that has a bunch of small creatures like humans. I mean, man, this card is just really good. Talking about really good cards, Swiftspear, again, not really much to be said. It's one of the best one-drops ever printed. I'm not sure if it's gonna, take Historic by storm right now, because, a deck like Wizards already has Symmetry Sage, which is very good. By the way, Symmetry Sage works very well with this card too. It has haste, it has 1 power, which means the Sage can buff its power. I mean, maybe there's a non-Wizards prowess deck that could play this. That sounds pretty good to me. But Swiftspear is just gonna get better with time. The more cards we have in Historic, the better Swiftspear is gonna be. And yeah, I mean, you're gonna be seeing this card a lot over the years. It was really played a lot in Modern, and it's definitely gonna be played a lot in Historic as well. This is Haywire Mite, kind of like a cute, kind of inconspicuous kind of card, but I think it's secretly very powerful. I mean, I'm pretty sure this is the cheapest artifact in enchantment, just destruction we have. I mean, destruction in quotes, because it actually exiles discard target artifacts lands. But obviously, not being able to target creatures is a big downside. But I mean, this is just so cheap. I mean, there had to be some kind of downside to a card that is this efficient, because I mean, it costs 1 mana to play. It's 2 mana in total, but you can split it in 2 turns. So I mean, it just doesn't get any cheaper than this. Basically, you can get it off a Karn, you can loop it with Loras. I mean, I'm not even sure that we could do this before with a card like Karn. I don't think Karn had a way to tutor for artifact and enchantment destruction like this before, unless it was something like Meteor Golem. But yeah, I mean, I think this card is good. If your deck, if you're playing maybe like a sacrifice deck, and dealing with creatures already isn't a big problem for you, I mean, this card is just incredibly cheap and efficient. Worth looking into for sure. This is Evangel of Synthesis. This is another card that I do think has a good amount of potential in the format. The way I look at these 2 mana creatures basically is that a 2 mana 3/3 is just, like a Watchdog. I think that 2 mana 3/3 vanilla in Historic is just a bad card. I think it's just unplayable. A 2 mana 3/3 with Evasion, now we're doing something, because a 2 mana 3/3 with Manus like this card, it will just it can easily deal like 6 damage to your opponent. Even 9 damage isn't really crazy for a 2 mana 3/3 Manus. So I think this card looks good. Obviously, you need to enable it. If you don't trigger the 2 or more thing every turn, then obviously this card is not that great. But even in that case, you already got the loot, and it works with itself. You have multiple copies of this. They will trigger themselves. I think this could be a good card in a deck like Reanimator we were talking about. Of course, maybe your Reanimator deck wants to be more controlling, but you know, this could be a good plan B for a Reanimator kind of deck, because this is a card that they really have to deal with. You know, they can't just ignore, or you know, this card will just deal 6-9 damage to them, and you know, they'll have to deal with it eventually. And meanwhile, you're enabling all your Reanimator synergies, of course. So I think this is a good card. Kind of narrow, of course. The mana cost also makes it very narrow, but worth looking into for sure. And this is the last card I'm gonna be talking about, Harbin Vanguard Aviator. I think this is a really, really good card. I mean, I've been talking a lot about humans. I think humans got a lot of good cards this set. I think Harbin, like I was saying, 2 mana 3/3 vanilla is bad. A 2 mana 3/3 with evasion is really good. And you know, of course, this has one less toughness, but a much better form of evasion and flying, of course. I mean, a 2 mana 3/2 with flyer, that's just like, that just sounds pretty good to me, especially in a deck like humans, which can buff it pretty easily. And you know, a lot of people ignore this line of text here, but I mean, look at how many soldiers humans is already running. I mean, all of these cards are soldiers that you already want to play. So like, this line of text will win you games, you know. It's not just, you know, something you can ignore. You know, maybe you're playing against like a Rakdos deck, for example, and they're trying to stonewall you with a Shieldred or something. I mean, you're just gonna fly over them and win the game. This card seems very good, very aggressive, definitely worth splashing for, especially for a deck like humans, which has all the tribal lands. They got a new land, a new dual land too. I mean, this card just seems very good to me. Slots right into humans. Of course, you're gonna have to, you know, maybe that's too many 2-drops. Maybe you play last copies of Thalia, I don't know, but definitely a card you should consider. And that's pretty much it. This video is already very long. I'm not gonna talk about the lands because, you know, you already had the pain lands. They're basically just more of the same. They're not great, not terrible. Play them if it fits your deck and your play style. Other than that, there's not really much else to talk about. I'm pretty sure I mentioned all of the new combos, or at least the ones that seemed like they had some kind of potential to me. But if I missed one, definitely let me know. And yeah, not really much else to talk about. Hope you guys have a great day, and I will be posting more videos in the future with the Brotherhood War cards. I'm already brewing a lot of decks. I already have some lists that are already looking pretty damn good. I'll definitely record some matches with them, maybe try to get them to Mythic, show you guys some good results, and yeah, that's pretty much it, everybody. I hope you guys have fun with the new cards and have a great day.